One of the worst naturally occurring elements you can get in your clay is gypsum. And that's because it can create spalls and cause your pottery to break apart even long after it's been fired. So some friends of mine recently discovered a really great clay source, and they told me where it was. I drove up there to find some. When I got there, all the clay had these tiny little crystals in it. I don't know if you can see it here because the lighting's different. Like out in the sunlight, you can really see these crystals, but under the studio lighting, not so much. But there's tiny little crystals in all of it. And at the place where I was digging it, I walked around different areas trying to find some that didn't have these crystals in it, and all seemed to have crystals in it. So I went ahead and collected it, and today I'm going to do an experiment to see if these are actually gypsum crystals or not. Some of the places I go to dig clay, right here in the Tucson area, there's huge, thick layers of gypsum crystals in there, these selenite crystals, in between layers of clay. And you have to be careful that you don't get this in your clay. In fact, you don't even want to dig anywhere close to this because one little bit of it in your clay can cause a big problem. And so I usually avoid selenite like the plague. Gypsum is a water-soluble mineral. In nature, gypsum that is dissolved in water is carried down into the ground. Because clay beds will hold on to water for a long time in dry soil, gypsum often precipitates as crystals at or near these underground clay layers over the course of centuries. These gypsum crystals, called selenite, can cause problems for potters. When gypsum is heated to between 120 to 180 degrees Celsius, it goes through a chemical reaction. The resulting material is calcium sulfate hemihydrate. This is what we commonly refer to as plaster of Paris. In this state, it is not a problem for pottery. The problem comes later. When the pottery becomes wet, these little pockets of plaster inside the clay body become activated and expand, causing the pottery to spall and break. The kind of temperatures you're looking at for turning selenite into plaster is like the kind of temperatures you get on your stovetop when you're cooking food. In fact, it's like campfire temperatures. I could throw a bit of this gypsum, theoretically, into a campfire and turn it into plaster. Now, some of the ancient Native Americans actually used selenite to make plaster of Paris. In New Mexico, they actually found kachina masks that were made out of plaster of Paris. Now, that's unusual, but they were using it, and it is easy to do. So when I'm firing this clay today to see if there's plaster in it, I'm also going to try heating up some of the selenite to see if I can make plaster in the same fire. So to get started, I'm going to grind up some of this clay in my corn grinder. One, 4, and 1 scoop of sand. That gives me 20% temper. Got a nice yellow color. Ooh, it is hydrophobic, isn't it? So there it is. It's a pretty yellow color, but I've seen it fired. It doesn't fire red, as I would assume, given its yellowish color. It fires brown. So I will let that sit for a while to kind of become more plastic and soak up the water, and then I'll make a little pinch pot and I'll fire it. All right, so this clay is sat for 24 hours, soaking up that water, getting more plastic. Now, I'm going to take it out and I'm going to make myself a little pot and dry it so that I can fire it. And the reason is, we're going to find out if those crystals are going to cause any trouble. Okay, today is firing day. Now you can see that those crystals are still visible on the clay on the bottom of the pot. So we'll look for those again after the firing to see if it's changed form at all. I'm also firing these 2 tiles that I made in the Ancient Potters Club a few months back. I started out by preheating the pot and these tiles in my oven at 225 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour or so before I started the actual firing. Today I'm doing a charcoal firing in my yard because it is fast and easy, and I can stay inside where it's air conditioned for most of the time the pots are being fired. The high today is forecast to be 103 degrees Fahrenheit, so the less time spent outdoors, the better. This firing technique was developed by my friend Tony Soares, so if you want to learn more about how it works, I'll provide a link up above and in the doobly-doo to Tony's video about it. Now don't forget about the selenite I was going to try roasting in this fire to turn into plaster. Here's a little chunk of that selenite, and I will just place it in this little bowl on top of these hot coals. Remember that it only needs to get up to about 150 degrees Celsius in order to change, so that should be more than adequate. And now I just have to wait a few hours for this to all burn down to ash. Okay, I got the pot fired and everything came out good. There's no cracks or anything in it. The one thing I have noticed right away is white specks. You see these? There are white specks all through this clay body, which weren't there before. So I'm assuming those are those crystals that have transformed into some other material in the firing. And so that is what I'm going to be looking at, is those white specks to see if those are plaster of Paris. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got some vinegar here. So I'm going to put some vinegar on one of these white areas or some of them and see if they react. Because if it's plaster of Paris, or if it's any sort of calcium-based material, if it's calcium carbonate or gypsum, it will react to the acid, this vinegar, and it will fizz. And so that will tell me that it's something that may not want in my clay body. And then after that, I'm going to fill this with water, or partially with water, and I'm going to let it sit for a period of time and see if any of this plaster of Paris starts to cause spalls or breakage in the pot. So that's my goal. The other thing to look at, more of a curiosity, is this piece of selenite that I put in the firing. And you can see that it's completely changed its form. It went in as a crystal, and now it's this white chalky substance, very soft. I assume you would put something like this in like a mortar and pestle, grind it up into a powder, and then wet it to use it as a plaster. So now I'm going to pour the vinegar on the pot, and hopefully we'll see some fizz on these white specks. Surprisingly, I'm not seeing any fizzing. I don't know if, let me see, maybe there's a layer of ceramic over the top of those so that the vinegar can't penetrate as easily, but I'm getting zero fizz off of that. Okay, now I'm going to pour the water in here, and I'm just going to let it sit for several hours. That way we have a chance to hopefully get some reaction out of those white specks that are presumably plaster of Paris. Now, theoretically, this should be plaster of Paris. I'm just grinding it into a powder so it can more easily absorb water. And then we're gonna mix it up. And if it is plaster of Paris, then it should heat up a little bit, it should expand a little bit, and it should, after a period of time, set into a solid material. We'll see. Okay, so this pot has been sitting all afternoon with water in it. And this video comes with a surprise ending and a learning experience. This gypsum is not acting the way I was always taught that it would. First of all, the gypsum that I fired and ground up. Okay, this should have been, according to what I was taught, the way to make plaster of Paris. And yet, it is not. It dried up a little bit and crackled, but it never set. It's still just like gypsum mud in a container. It's just as you would expect any soft earthen material. If you wet it, it's just kind of soft and muddy, you know. It did not turn into plaster of Paris. And then this. Every one of those little white spots is not expanding at all, that I can tell. Now, there is a white material kind of developing, especially along the rim. And what that is, I believe, is that's that gypsum becoming, remember I talked about it being water soluble. It's being absorbed by the water and it's being drawn up. And as the water evaporates on the upper part of the pot, it is being condensing. It is precipitating there. It is building up. We actually have like hard water deposits essentially. So that gypsum is actually being deposited along the rim. And you can see that white kind of snow on there. Now maybe some types of gypsum are dangerous to pottery and some types aren't. Maybe gypsum is dangerous to high fire pottery and not to low fire pottery. I don't know. This is all new to me because, you know, it's always been said that gypsum in your clay was a bad thing. Now, it's porous. It's more porous than usual, and I think that's because we have all those little capsules of gypsum in there that are soft and chalky, like that rock that I fired. Eventually, those will break out, maybe even, or get dissolved by water, and you'll have actual pores in the pot. So definitely there was a lot of water running through this when I first poured it in. So it's definitely made for a more porous pot. I don't think it's the best material that you would want in your clay. Certainly does not help for making strong, durable pottery, but it's not as dangerous as we might have been led to believe. So that's where I'm at. Now, if you're interested in minerals that you really don't want in your clay, I made a video about caliche and calcium carbonate. Now, I will promise you that is something you definitely don't want in your clay because I have experienced it. And I will link that video up right over here so you can learn about caliche and calcium carbonate. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.